I'm inviting my panelists to come up on the stage, and we're going to sort of go down the line and introduce ourselves to get started today. We're really excited to have this conversation, and we're going to just jump right in.
Hi, folks. Can you all hear me okay? Okay. I am Daniela DiGiacomo. I am an assistant professor in my 4th year at the University of Kentucky. Now you can. Right. I'll try it again. I'm Daniela DiGiacomo. I am a 4th year assistant professor at the University of Kentucky. I'm a community-based researcher who focuses on the study of youth learning and development.
I'm Helen Obuna. I'm a junior at Colorado State University, Fort Collins, and I was involved in the study in 2020 as a student researcher.
Hi everyone, my name is Syeda Tabassum. I'm a senior at the Macaulay Honors College in New York, and I was also a youth researcher on this project.
And I forgot the slide advancer, so I'll be right back.
Hi everyone, I'll jump in. My name is Deepa Vasudevan. I'm a researcher at the American Institutes for Research. I focus on youth development and youth workers in particular, and I'm a co-PI on the research team that focus on the study for equity and access in out-of-school time programs. Very happy to be here virtually.
All right, excellent. Let's have a seat. All right, so you just heard we have a 4th panelist who's joining virtually, and I think in a moment we'll be able to also see her as well. So I'm really excited for us to dig into this conversation, and we're just going to get started. We heard that there was a youth-led research study that sort of forms the basis of what we're going to be talking about this morning, and I just want to start with a little bit more background about what that study was about.
All right, we'll get going. So a few years ago, the Wallace Foundation put out a request for proposals for folks to come together for a national study into the pressing problems of practice and innovations with regard to issues of equity in the field of out-of-school time learning. It's going really well. There we go. And so a few of us from different universities, including myself at the University of Kentucky, Ben Kirshner at the University of Colorado Boulder, Deepa Vasudevan at Wellesley College, Bianca Baldridge at then Wisconsin, now Harvard, and Sam Mejias from the Parsons New School, we came together and we partnered on a study proposal to Wallace Foundation to say that, you know, we're excited to do this study, but when we do it, we're going to bring a mixed methods approach to understanding the pressing problems of practice and the innovations in the field, but young people are going to be doing it not only alongside us, but they're going to be leading the charge in terms of the study design, methodology, and also the analysis of the data. And so our primary role on the project, and mine in particular, was to be an adult ally for the young people as they studied the pressing problems of practice from their own lived experiences, and they led in co-designing a study that made sense to them, both from their experiences and also from gathering the experiences and perspectives of their peers. So we built that into the study design. And so simultaneously we came together across Colorado, Kentucky, and New York, and we recruited young people from organizations that we were existing partners with, and then they basically took it away from there.
Wonderful, thank you. So we're going to just jump in to highlight some of the themes from the study, and the first one is around access. So your study found that there were, I think, there we go, the slides are working. Your study found that there were significant barriers to participation in OST programs. Can you share more about those barriers and the extent to which they're experienced?
So our study found that programs were more likely to be in higher income neighborhoods, and it left the low income communities with fewer options for the children. So these obviously made the issues worse for students of color. Another issue is in admissions criteria that excluded young people from joining after-school programs based on their ability to pay or based on age. So, yeah, just a bunch of unnecessary fees that kept them from participating, and it kept them from accessing programs that were needed and that could benefit them. And finally, there were adults and other peers who were sort of acting as gatekeepers of knowledge and resources that could help these children out. So, yeah, there was just a lack of knowledge distribution from adults to younger students.
Do you want to add on to
Yeah, I wanted to add on to that. Something recently that we've like really highlighted is like this idea of like marketing and outreach, which like is really integral because like a lot of students were asking like, how do you even find out about these programs? You know, and like that shouldn't be the issue. It's like the kids who are interested in this should know about it, and how do we like get the correct outreach? And like it shouldn't just be like through computers or like through technology. There should be other ways. It shouldn't also just be through word of mouth. We should have like multiple ways of outreach, and that can be a barrier, you know, to access. So that's something we need to think about as well.
Yeah, I want to kind of pull on that a little bit. You're talking about some of the challenges to access. Do you have any thoughts about what changes can be made to make these kinds of OST programs more accessible?
I would say that there needs to be like an adjustable fee if you're going to attach it to an after-school program, just so you can make it inclusive of others who might not be able to pay for their kids to be involved. So yeah, I'd start there. I would try to make it cheaper for people. Yeah.
You mentioned costs. You were, Syeda, you were just talking about other, you know, just knowing about it. Like, what are ways that folks might share about the opportunities available in ways that, you know, people who are looking for those opportunities would be able to access them?
Yeah, I really think it's about the way that I found out about like a lot of the programs I was in was like through my teachers, through like other organizations I had worked with. So it's about like fostering like alumni connections as well. It's like now that I've participated in these programs, I'm gonna go on and tell other people about it. Like I'm always doing that. Like I'm that person who's like, oh, you're interested in this? Like, oh, maybe you'd love this. And I think that's really important. I think it's like a really powerful way. And also like I like social media is a big way now. I always see like posters and things being shared nowadays, and I think that's also a really powerful tool.
Yeah, I think that's a step in the right direction, and at the same time, it shouldn't be that it's word of mouth that we're getting out about these things, right? And so just to circle back to the experiences that they're sharing were also echoed by the young people that they interviewed and surveyed. And so in each of the 4 sites in Colorado, Kentucky, and New York, what the young people decided to do themselves was also a mixed method study. So they designed a survey, and they administered it to around 200 of their peers via social media. And then they also conducted purposefully sampled peer-to-peer focus groups. This was all during the onset of the pandemic, so everything was virtual. But it allowed us to have a lot of geographic spread in our data collection. And so the experiences that they were sharing, because they were also doing autoethnographies in the work, were echoed by their peers. And so we came to call it, or students came to call it, you know, basically I said, you guys have an issue of marketing. Like, why are the only reason that we're learning about out-of-school time programs from a great science teacher or a friend or a grandmother? You know, we need to think about designing ecologies, as folks were talking about yesterday, in which young people happen across these good opportunities routinely, not just through sort of word of mouth and happenstance and ad hoc experiences. So as the young people came to think about what were, for them, they called them the bright spots and the pain points of the programs. And one of the pain points related to access was just basically knowing that the programs existed. And when they were asked about, you know, do all of your peers know about programs that you were in, this answer is no, right? And so we need to think about how, from a design perspective, we're thinking about ecologies of opportunity for the out-of-school time space and not just one-off experiences.
Thank you. I want to sort of transition a little bit to another aspect. We've been talking about access to even knowing about programs, but another element is how the extent to which young people feel that sense of belonging. So in your research, it also showed that an inclusive environment is an important factor in a young person's decision to participate in an OST program and to stay involved, even more so than the kinds of activities or learning opportunities that are available in the program. Can you share more about this finding and what kinds of things make OST programs feel welcoming and inclusive?
Yeah, I can take that one. So yeah, what we discovered is that young people really value the social connections and relationships that they form in OST programs, and these relationships are like a large part of what make these programs meaningful to them. So to create an inclusive environment, it's really about actively avoiding bias and discrimination and favoritism, because we've realized through like the focus groups and the surveys that like students are really like perceptive and notice when like certain individuals are being favored or treated better than others, and obviously that's not what we want in these spaces. So I mean, this creates like a sense of like alienation, and it also, we found that like POC students in particular experience like tokenization and being treated differently due to their identities. Like they were being casted in the same roles, like in their theater programs. And yeah, so like our survey responses confirmed this, and it's not like an isolated incident. Like over like 53.1% of students reported that they have been treated differently because of their identities in these programs. So, and we know like this is a crucial time in young people's lives where they're like developing their identities, and feeling accepted and valued is like essential. Yeah.
Also like to add, can you guys hear me? Keep talking. Okay, hello? Okay, I'd also like to add that we should be actively training educators and other adults to be more inclusive. And this shouldn't be like a diversity and inclusion workshop that you check off during the beginning of the year. It should be, yeah. It should be something that's done over and over again in all OST programs, and something that we don't value as much because we've put too much. I think we've put all of our hopes into this workshop that's supposed to solve all of our problems.
That does. I heard someone say it again. Do you want to say it again? I feel like it needs a little. Yeah, it's not a one-time thing. It's an ongoing practice. Yeah, thank you. I want to make sure that we include Deepa, who is joining us virtually. And Deepa, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about what can be done to help the OST staff create these kind of environments where everyone feels welcomed and valued.
Yes, thank you. And I feel like Helen really, hit the nail on the head with how this can't be like a one-time or one-off deal. And a lot of times, out of school time, facilitators, youth workers, after-school staff, they are building really meaningful relationships with young people in programs, right? And so, I think that oftentimes. Youth workers are doing the work of trying to lift up and celebrate young people. But in that process, it's harder to also spend that time to look inward and to embed those anti-racist practices in everyday work that you do with young people. And so even though there are tons of programs that are anti-racist and led by educators who are people of color, a lot of organizations are still really embedded in a legacy around white saviorism and this idea of, programs saving young people, right? And this itself is inherently racist, and it's also positioning young people as, quote unquote, at risk or that they need to be fixed instead of looking at the social systems, right? And so even when program staff are, they don't have those mentalities, their program actually might be promoting their work in a way that makes young people feel uncomfortable. They might feel tokenized by the way that their program is being advertised, and oftentimes being advertised to funders and donors. And so I think that what we saw from research with frontline staff is that we really need to support disrupting racism that's happening also at the organizational level, and also making sure that the people who are working in programs really feel aligned with how programs are being messaged, and I think Daniela talked earlier about being adult ally, and I also feel like continuing to support out of school time educators and youth workers in building those partnerships with young people. I do think that youth will call out programs and educators if they feel like these spaces are not inclusive. And that will happen even more if we see young people as leaders and co-creators in these spaces as well. So I just wanted to lift up this continued idea of allyship, and adults and young people working together to reflect on their organizations, to reflect on the program practices that are happening. And this is what's going to really lead to healing and wellness within programs. And I'll talk about this later, but none of this work can be done without a thriving workforce and a sustainable workforce. But I'll talk about that later.
So a teaser of what's to come. That idea of youth adult partnership makes me wonder. I would love to hear, Helen and Syeda, from your experiences, what does that look like for you, being in spaces where you've had an opportunity to feel like your involvement is really genuine and authentic. It's not that tokenizing sort of experience, but really feels like you're in partnership and have that sense of belonging. Could you describe like some of what those experiences have been and what they felt like?
I'd say having spaces where I'm able to, I guess, sort of shape the space that I want to be in and what I want that to look like has been extremely helpful for me. I'm at a predominantly white institution at Colorado State University, and it's a very white town. But within that, I am also involved in the Black and African American Cultural Center, which has been a really inclusive space for me and all students, really. And it's just having that space where you can truly be yourself. And it's like, I guess it's something that you don't really think about in that moment until you leave that space and you're like, wow, that was really important for me and I needed that.
Yeah, I just want to add on to that. I mean, I think the first time that I realized like I was in like a really like safe and inclusive space was at a nonprofit called Arts Connection, which is kind of how I got involved in this research, funny enough. And what we did, we had this teen advisory council where we were basically like planning the events for teens, like it was by teens and for teens. And one of the little things that we did at every meeting was like, we would lead like an icebreaker, like a different teen would lead an icebreaker every time. And I thought that was just like so cool. It was the first time I was doing something like that. And like I grew up like pretty shy. And like that was like one of the first times I was like, you know what, like I'm gonna do this thing that's like kind of like a leadership thing. And since then I've just been like empowered to just like take on more leadership roles. And I think like just starting from something small like that is really important. And in that program, like they really supported me even after I left the Teen Advisory Council. I came back as an intern. I worked with the mentor on her like little side business project, and then I got involved in this research. It was just like having those experiences where you're just like constantly pulled back in and you still feel supported. It's also something I experienced in this like Y-Power group. It's like those kind of experiences are like something that's like that can sustain themselves like over time. So yeah.
I want to add on a little bit from the folks. Hear me okay? Okay. From the adult perspective and for the researchers in the room and also practitioners in the room, you know, to create these sort of dialogic, meaningful relationships with young people, it doesn't necessarily happen in the 9 to 5, right? And I think and I don't know, I think this is sort of some unresolved tensions for those parents in the room too, because the meetings that I do on a regular basis, my Tuesday through Thursday nights are spent right now, because I work with your youth organizations in Kentucky and beyond, my 5 to 9 p.m. times are spent on Zoom with youth and with teachers. So if you're doing that work, you're doing it in the after school hours. And it's, and I have a little one at home, and it's a challenge, right? But this is not like once a month you're meeting. It's like, this is routinely, weekly. And, you design other community systems to then support, for example, my own family at home, because if I'm going to be doing that work, it's not a one-off situation. So I have now come to call Kentucky my home, because the Kentucky Student Voice team, who I work with, who is a big part of this project, I'm meeting with them more than I'm meeting with my adult friends, right? But that's what it takes to co-create meaningful relationships that are flexible, that have room for back and forth movement, that have the room necessary for learning and development, right? And so in order to push against, I think, this type of youth tokenization that happens in co-design, if you're truly co-designing something and you are having young people lead the research and the actions and the solutions to the work, it's not a once a month meeting, right? It takes time, and it takes after hours time. And so I just want to sort of call that out, because I think that's one of the less visible things in this work when you think about co-creating intergenerational partnerships.
Thank you for that. I feel like this is sort of transitioning us again into our next theme, which is really about youth voice and leadership. And so I'm, hearing that part of the what makes an experience supportive of belonging is that opportunity for youth voice. I appreciated your example about how something as small as having an icebreaker built into just how the program is structured can create those meaningful opportunities for leadership. But of course, that's not the only opportunity that you had for leadership. And I also just want to lift up what I just heard about the importance of building relationships, right? Like that's where there's a lot of the power really comes out of genuine and authentic relationships. And you were talking before about like you can tell the difference when it's a genuine relationship and there's a genuine interest in wanting to make those connections, and when it's just we're having this meeting because we said we would or whatever. So as you think about sort of how youth voice and youth leadership in OST programs, how can youth voice and their perspectives be incorporated into the design of programs, and why is that important?
I want to loosely quote Spandana on this, who's another youth researcher. She was talking about how it's like the difference between sending a feedback form at the end of a program, which I'm sure we've all done at some point. It's like that Google form. It's like, what was your experience like? Versus co-designing a project, or actually taking in those feedback, and you can see the change the next year. I think that's a big thing about including student voice. So yeah.
Yeah, it's not just about the sort of making space, but holding space, not talking, listening as adults, stepping back and really hearing. Because we know that youth interest is a driver of sustained engagement and coming back, right? But what does it take to maintain that youth interest? It's not really surprising, youth feeling like they matter in the space, right? And to feel like you matter, you have to have a place. You have to be able to personally contribute to the practice and personally contribute to the design, and that takes time.
I'd also like to add, let youth pick and focus on what they think are I don't want to say problems, but just things that they'd like to work on within their communities. You don't go into these spaces and tell them that they need to work on this thing. I think it's really important that young people are able to identify, their passions within their communities and the things that they'd really like to, work on.
Do you have a sense from your research how common those kinds of practices are? It sounds like, young people are saying that that's what they want, that those things are really engaging, that supports a sense of belonging. Do you have a sense of like how common that those kinds of things are for young people to experience that kind of partnership with adults and youth engagement?
Based on personal experience, I don't think it's that common. Yeah, the first time that I was involved in like a student-led research project was in high school, and I was working with a nonprofit organization called Project Voice, based in Denver, and I was able to like identify an issue within Denver, and I focused on environmental racism, and I was able to like provide workshops and work with community leaders. But yeah, I'd say that was probably the only time as a young student where I was able to do something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer is just like not common enough. If we're like still talking about it, like, like,
Yeah.
yeah, like.
I guess if you had us up here, then it's not common enough, right? And I will say, alongside the youth study that Wallace commissioned, the adults led a study where we interviewed around 100 experts across the country. And experts were not just researchers, but were purposefully so leaders of OST programs, practitioners, and also policy folks and funders like yourself outside. And we talked to them about the same core questions. So what are the pressing problems of practice in the field, and what's going well? What are some innovations with regard to issues of inequity in the field? And in large part, and you're welcome to read the studies, the answers mirror each other, or reflected each other's from what the young people said and what the adults said. So designing for belonging really mattered, and OST program designers and researchers said that one of the fundamental things they struggle with is how to think about purposefully designing relationships that enable the type of experiences that young people say are so important.
I want to ask a little bit more about the research process that you engaged in and of itself, because that, in addition to being sort of having a set of research questions that you were working on, being part of this youth participatory action research project also is a model of the kind of youth-led work that you're describing. So could you talk about what you learned from the research process, and what were the benefits of youth and adults working together, and just like why is it important to approach research in that way?
I think for the first time, many of us, we were pretty young. I'd say we were like from 15 to 18. I think that was our age range.
We were just presenting at AERA, and I introduced one of the other students, and I was like, oh, and this is Spandana, and she's in high school. She's like, I'm in college. Because it was 3 years ago now, but in the COVID land, it's, yeah. Keep going.
But we were learning how to do things that we've never done before. Like, I've never coded an interview. I've never wrote a survey questions and distributed them on the internet. What else have I never done? I've never led a focus group, and that was really cool to do. So I think providing young people with the resources to do that, and providing them with guidance, I think that was the most beneficial thing to me, because I'm doing research now at CSU, and I really like it.
Yeah, I mean, similarly for me, it kind of just made me realize, research is something I can do. And also I think it was the adult researchers were really forgiving, and the little things that we didn't know how to do, we didn't need to feel like experts. They were just so welcoming and supportive of us just learning this for the first time. And I think that's important. That's an important experience for youth to have. Because again, I'm also doing my thesis research now, and I'm you know what, this isn't so bad. I've done something like this before.
Graduating in 3 years.
Yes, I think, it's just really important to have these experiences and know that they exist. Yeah.
Could you tell a little bit more about the kind of partnership? You talked a little bit about, having an opportunity to build new skills and try out new things and in a space where it was okay to make mistakes. But can you talk about like that partnership with the adult researchers and the youth researchers? Like, what was that like?
I will say just briefly that I think because it was during COVID, right, and it was always at night, and I think at that point we had gotten used to just, you have this insight into people's lives, right, through this, and so it did engender this, I think, sense of closeness, the routine meetings all the time with ourselves, our kids, their parents, their sisters. It was like everyone's sort of in the space, and nothing was not okay. So half the time one of us was like on a train or in a subway or on the phone, like it's like weird stuff, right? But if you keep that going and that just becomes part of the routine, that's how the partnerships get formed. I mean, and all of us were learning how to use, for example, different technological platforms and Slack and Zoom and Slack and Google and bots. It's like, there's a lot going on. But it creates the sort of, that fluid back and forth relationship creates the situation now where when I need something, I'll text one of the students and say, hey, where did we put this data piece? Or like, oh, can you say, I mean, it's actually in many ways much more functional than my grad student work. So it's a really dialogic back and forth relationship. But I think, again, and I know I keep saying this, but it takes that commitment and time on the part of all parties to keep showing up and keep being in that space, and to not just honor the times and the modalities and the platforms that work for particular people in the group, but to be open to like using a phone, to meeting at a certain time, to adapt. You really have to think about not just the mode, but the means of participating and communicating and what that looks like.
From the perspective of a student researcher, I'd also say that every day I came into that space feeling included, and I didn't feel like any information was being withheld from me, or I felt like they were willing to help me learn something that I've never done before, and I think that's really important. So yeah, I think that willingness is something that's often missing when we work with adults as young people. But yeah, I think it's great that this study allowed that and provided space for us as young people to I guess, yeah, do research.
Yeah, I think Daniela really hit on a point that like is really about accessibility. When we think about it, it's like not everyone can show up in the same way. Like we all have different circumstances. So when we're thinking about youth, we really have to think about like not every student can show up the same way. There can be like issues when it comes to like just getting to a certain like program because like a parent is working that day, or like like attendance shouldn't be the main thing when it comes to these programs, because you cannot show up every day the same way, especially. And I think something we did in our research was like when we started the meeting, we would like ask about how everyone's feeling, how everyone's doing. I remember one icebreaker question was like, if you could describe your mood in like a weather forecast, like what would it be? And somebody said like thunderstorm, and I'm like, what does that mean? Like I don't know, but these kind of questions are important and like integral, just to like get a sense of like how everyone's feeling in the room. And I think it's also taught me how I want to be a leader. It's about like having compassion and knowing like not everyone is like, you don't know what people went through before they got to that meeting. So I think that's really important.
There's one other area that I want to talk about, some of the insights from this study, and that's about the OST workforce. And Deepa mentioned a few minutes ago that she was going to come back and talk to us a little bit more about that. So we're gonna do that now. The study found that the recruitment and retention of OST staff was a challenge. Could you talk about what factors contributed to that challenge?
Yes, yeah, and I also want to note that it for us doing this research, it confirmed a lot of what people already know who do the work in out of school time, know about workforce issues, and I also want to go back to what Daniela said about all the different hats that the workforce wears. And one of our lead researcher, Dr. Bianca Baldridge, talks about these roles, right? We think of the workforce, they're educators, they're counselors, cultural workers, they're mediators, they're assisting youth of color as they construct their identities in a racially hostile society. And she talks about how they also don many hats, right? Teacher, counselor, curriculum developer, janitor, disciplinarian, mentor, party planner, trainer, tutor, grant writer, or marketing strategist. And so I just wanted to like name all of these different roles that youth workers take on. And as Daniela already noted, a lot of the people we talk to who are working directly with young people, they're doing this work on top of 2 or 3 other jobs, right? Because oftentimes having a youth program position or having an out of school time youth leader role is not set up right now. It's not designed as a full-time job with benefits. And so oftentimes youth workers are being very creative, right, in terms of how they were trying to stay in the field. But that was also in many ways, like hurting them and devaluing the very important work and relationship building that they were doing with young people. And so, the youth workers that we talked to, they talked about job insecurity. They talked about a lack of health and retirement benefits. And they also talked about racist workplaces. And so Black and Latinx program directors were sharing with us their experiences of being demoted at times for speaking out against racist or tokenizing experiences of youth in their programs. Some of them learned out while they were in leadership positions that their white colleagues were making more money than them. The college students that we talked to who were volunteering or working part-time oftentimes describe entering after-school programs without preparation or guidance. And they expressed that concern because they felt like their universities and their colleges were telling them that to partner with young people from communities of color, Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and Asian communities wasn't worth paying. And so like I think that there was like this tension when we were talking to young people about entering this field, that they were like, oh, like, is this sustainable? Because I've started off this position and I'm not being paid a livable wage to do this work. So what does this mean? And so there's so many challenges that are preventing this workforce from really thriving and from growing, and for people to really stay in this field. Uh, and so, a lot of this was also exacerbated during COVID-19. And a few of our participants pointed out that there was disparities between who was asked to go back into work, and this is oftentimes after school program staff. And there was a lot of beautiful work done by community-based organizations during this time. But a lot of these program staff noted that oftentimes predominantly white teaching workforces were protected, from exposure to COVID-19, whereas oftentimes staff that were predominantly women of color in after-school programs were the ones who were being asked to go back in very early. And so there's a lot of challenges and things that the program directors and program staff that we talked to reflected on.
Thank you. That makes me think of what we heard yesterday when Liz Ryan was sharing about the levels of investment in the juvenile carceral system versus investment in other youth serving systems. And so I think that connection there is really stark. Important to think about. Can you maybe reflect a little bit on what could be done to improve the working conditions for staff and make OST a space where folks can envision and have long-term careers?
Yes, and I know this is going to sound so basic, but really we need to start with providing a livable wage to our workforce, right? We need to this is just, I just think that this is so fundamental. This is the starting point for everything. We're talking about issues of equity. I think equity starts at home, and we really need to pay and support our workforce. And so we also need to provide opportunities for professional growth, opportunities for promotion, and pathways into other, whether it's within youth programs or in other forms of education. Even though when we were interviewing youth workers and program directors, there wasn't really consensus on like how the field should be professionalized. Many of the people that we talk to and the experts, they do want investments that really legitimize youth work, increasing wages and salaries. One of the researchers that we talked to actually said that a lot of times youth programs are losing youth workers to the fast food industry or neighboring counties that offer a higher minimum wage, right? And so this creates a unique set of challenges for out of school time programs. And so I do think foundations and I do think city and municipal, entities that have funding that can kind of help continue sustaining this workforce can really play a huge role. And any sort of campaigns where we're respecting and legitimizing this workforce, I think is so important. Conferences like this one, I think that can be incredibly meaningful to do that kind of advocacy work at the local and national level. And then I also really think that, I want to just highlight the importance of thinking about the well-being of our practitioners and our educators. And so, people in our study, practitioners and scholars, spoke really candidly about precarity in the field and the turnover and the low wages, right? And so how do you take care of yourself? How do you build morale when you're also, when you're trying to, play a caring role for young people, but maybe experiencing those traumas yourself? And so, I think that, for some of the youth workers we talked to, it was about getting those peer networks and professional networks to help with that everyday work. For others, it was like, give us mental health supports, make this a key benefit to being part of this work. And so I'm sorry, I feel like I could talk about this all day, but there's so many ways in which we need to build these positions in which they are salaried and with benefits, and that we're really thinking about the mental well-being of youth workers, especially as they're trying to create these safe and inclusive spaces for young people.
Thank you. I think we absolutely could talk about that all day.
And a small note, I will say too, just in line with what Deepa just said, a big thanks to the Wallace Foundation, and I think foundations are moving this direction. But as part of this project, we built into the proposal that all the youth that we were working with as youth researchers and that we interviewed were going to be paid, right? Again, not one time, but... and they're also who supports us being here, right? So this is the type of, it's not just about doing the research, right, but then getting the work out. So we engaged in a series of podcasts. We presented at American Educational Research Association conference. We're here. And that takes, again, time, but also money to support the youth that are doing that work. And we know very well in the field that, like, the type of youth that we want to be supporting especially are those that often have to take care of their brothers and sisters or work in other places. So we need to be paying them also in the youth organizations in which we're supporting.
Thank you. That's actually a great transition into our Q&A portion because that question was asked by the audience. So we're just... Yeah, that's right. We're moving right along. I do want to invite folks, if you want to come to, there's a couple of microphones in the audience if you want to come and ask a question, or if you want to, submit them through the app, we can still see them there. I'm trying to get the correct slide up because I know folks are also interested in reviewing the results of the study. And so there's a QR code on the screen where you can find out more information about this project and the results and the reports that have come out of it. And Daniela just mentioned a podcast that was produced by the Wallace Foundation and is excellent. The host was one of the young people who was part of the research study. So a really great podcast to check out. So I'm not seeing folks at the microphones, but I'll start with just sort of teeing up a question as we're thinking about the opportunities and the challenges in the OST space. Do you have any sort of parting advice that you would give to folks who have the power to make changes about what should be done to improve access and equity in youth programs?
I mean, I think first and foremost, like, it's about funding. So, like, open up those checkbooks. No. No, and I think it's just, again, like, thinking about, like, youth voices and making sure those, like, survey responses don't, like, go in the void somewhere. And really just, like, co-creating and doing those icebreaker activities. Those are really important. Yeah. Do you want to add something, Helen?
I'd also say conduct a needs assessment of wherever you are and make sure that whatever resources you provide are meeting the needs of the community. That's that's important, and I think we don't prioritize that as much as we should.
Yeah, absolutely. I see we have someone ready to ask a question.
I'm not sure if this is working. I can just, there we go.
There you go. Start talking. It'll work.
My name's Ezra Howard. I'm with the Nashville After Zone Alliance. I'm their data and evaluation manager. I also have a background in educational research. So I was curious, particularly with the training of high school students on methodology, what sort of shifts and approach that you might have had to do in order to train younger folks, people younger than a college age. And I would imagine maybe a traditional lecture approach wouldn't necessarily work in that environment, or if it was more like an apprentice approach, that sort of thing.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So in this particular study, because we worked to connect with our existing youth organizations, so in Kentucky, I worked with the Kentucky Student Voice team. In Denver, we worked with Project Voice that I was a part of as a grad student and Helen was a part of. And then in New York, it was with Arts Connection, in a lot of these programs, these were long-standing youth organization programs that had young people that had been involved for many years doing YPAR work. So there was not heavy lifting at all on our part in terms of that sort of training. But I will say, broadly speaking, as a community-based YPAR researcher, again, I think it's really about the time and the thoughtfulness that the adults can put into thinking about what it means to be an adult ally, and to honor and hear and lift up and make space for young researchers to understand, to start to understand themselves, right, as part of, because that's a lot about the research that we do is a lot about our own positionalities in the space. So I think it's giving and honoring the time that it takes young people to come, and adults alike to come to see themselves as active parts of the research process, and as Syeda said, not research as something that's abstract. And so what that looks like is a lot of conversations and dialogue and exploring different types of research in the world and not just thinking about research as coming from an ivory tower. So just being really visible about what it means and what type of evidence counts as research, right? It's not just statistics, it's testimonies, it's experiences, it's photographs, it's voices, it's thinking about the myriad of types of evidence that constitute research. And so it's having those conversations, I think, up front, and then allowing for a lot of time and exploration on the part of the youth.
How you doing? Ari Fernandez, Bronx, New York. Represent, right? Anyway, so I know you guys mentioned that you have researchers from the ages 15 to 18, and we understand that, I think we could all agree that the mentalities of our students and the youth are built at very young. So I was wondering if you guys are looking to open your opportunities and your platform to younger students, and how would you do so?
The short answer is yes. We restricted it in this sense to high school, but I mean, I think a lot of us work and think it's super important to start younger. And I personally think that would be totally fine. And we'll work with middle school students as we speak in terms of apprenticing them into youth participatory action research models as well. I don't know if you all both have perspectives on age.
Yeah, like just to echo you, yeah, I mean, I think that would be great, yeah.
Never too young. Questions at any age. So yeah.
Thank you.
I would also just chime in and say, like, this particular project, the youth research team, like, I led them to do surveys and focus groups, but there's also, projects with younger children that might focus on photo voice and, the children taking photos and then exploring their communities through those photos. And so there's also different types of literacies and different types of research that can happen. Oftentimes YPAR does tend to focus more on middle and high school youth, but I think that there's also really creative ways to introduce this idea of understanding your community and seeing patterns and things that are important to you, at any age, and you can start developing those skills. And yeah, this particular project, was with older youth, but I think that there could be great value to it at any age.
Hi, Kim Flores from Hello Insight. I loved the work that you all did, and I loved the intentionality that you had around the power dynamics in the room, and how thoughtful you were about how much time and effort this takes, because I know that it does. But one of the things that really struck me about your finding, it was kind of depressing to me, was that we're still struggling so much as a sector to lift youth voice and share power. So that was, it really struck my heart, because it's something I've been working on for the last 30 plus years, and I know everybody in this room has. And so to see that statistic that we're still not getting there with people in this field who are so passionate and dedicated to youth voice, that we're still not there yet is a challenge. And I was thinking about the strategic plan from that you all put forward, and thinking about how do we address the concept of adultism square on, and how do we bring that into this space as we're thinking about the ecosystem and where adultism is playing out in that ecosystem. Because it seems to me if we're not addressing that straight on across the ecosystem, we're going to be here 30 years from now again. And I really hope that we think about that, or I don't know if you have great ideas about how we can address that across the ecosystem, because I would love to hear more about that.
I think that's a pressing problem of practice. But I'm curious to hear what you both think.
Yeah, I mean, I think like OSTs are like this really great opportunity where you don't really have this like hierarchical structure like you do in like a classroom. So like there's a lot of opportunity for like multi-directional learning, where it's like the students are learning from the like youth workers as much as the youth workers are learning from the students. And so yeah, like how do we do that? I think just again doing like incorporating student voices and like have like making sure the students have agency in how these programs are created, because a lot of the times you'll find that they have like really great ideas. So yeah,
I'd also agree with that. I'd say actively listen and validate young people, and support them as they navigate their communities.
Yeah, and I mean, your comment is really thoughtful, and it's just making me think that in addition to the work that program leaders can do to support ongoing anti-racist trainings and anti-colonial trainings, there also needs to be work on, don't want to bring in epistemology, but that knowledge is co-created, right? And squarely address the power dynamics that come with adult youth or teacher-student relationships that even in out-of-school time spaces can play out. And as an adult ally, what's crushing, and I'm sure you all have this experience, is to have young people engage in this type of work. They go speak at, City Hall, or they go speak at the Kentucky Board of Education, and the adults say back to them, like, way to go, how cute, something like this. And it's just, once again, that shows not taking seriously ideas, right, and experiences. And so then that begets like a lot of necessary reflection on the part of the adult allies to make sense of those experiences. So we need to think about how to challenge on an everyday basis the adultism that comes in, and I think delimits the opportunities for meaningful intergenerational relationships.
I want to like add on something really quickly. I think having like the youth poets introduce this was like such a great thing. Like it almost like brought me to tears, because you can just see how much like they're like experts in their own experiences, and I think we have to realize that, like it's crazy how much like our generation, like what we go through, like what we've seen, like I feel like we've almost had to grow up at a really young age, unfortunately, through like the things that we see happening in our country. So I think realizing that is really important.
We currently have 2 more minutes for questions.
Hi, I'm Mariani from New York City. Woo! And my question was, so in this space with facilitators, like, and your identities clashing, you're obviously from different states, different backgrounds, especially like, how do you create an inclusive environment in which these students are united towards one goal or certain goals that are similar? And how do you get all of them on the same page? And to the students and to the student researchers, how do you feel represented, or how is your identity validated every day despite the differences?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think something that I realized when we were doing this research is like me coming from New York, like the opportunities that I get, like there is just like so many opportunities for youth programs. But then when I was talking to like Spandana, like in Kentucky, she was like, we just don't have that here. And I'm like, that is so unfortunate, but that's like something we can learn. And I think that's like a great thing that we had, like having this like national thing, like having youth voices from different parts of the country. Like I come from a big city, but you're coming from Colorado, so we have different experiences, but again, like we can learn from each other. I think that's something important we learned.
I think our shared passions really contributed to this research project, and it's the reason why we were so aligned with each other. Like this, we wanted to do this work, and I think wanting to do it was important for us.
Yeah, I think it's a good question also, and I would just say that I don't know that you necessarily need all of the same goals. I think it can be a lot of the same shared values and reasons for being in the work. And people participate at different moments in time for different reasons. But I think from an adult perspective, again, it's really about stepping back and letting the telos not be yours.
Thank you to our panelists. This has been really fantastic. As we think about sort of what's next from here, there's been lots of really thought-provoking conversation, lots of really wonderful insights shared, and great resources that you can follow up on as well. We wanted to have an opportunity to make sure that you in the audience have a chance to have a moment of reflection. We know that that learning is supported through opportunities for structured reflection, and that's important for adults as it is for young people. And so just have a set of reflection questions on the screen to sort of give you a moment to sort of think about what you'll do with what you've just heard. So reflecting on what the panel shared, we're thinking about how we can better support access, equity, and quality in our youth serving programs. What is something that you should start to do? What's something that you may need to stop doing? And what's something that you need to continue doing? I know we're at time, so I want to just leave you with those questions. If you have a moment before you transition into your next space to just make a note and think about how you'll take this with you in an actionable way. And thank you again to our panelists. Give them another round of applause.